Obzon Hydra. He'll be playing against a more classic list on Brian's side of just Obzon aggro.
And I think the matchup here is solid for Brian. He's got a couple copies of Wingmate Rock, excellent in this kind of matchup. Also 2 copies of Ultimate Price, very, very good against the Hydra.
Yeah. Both players on 7 cards as we are going to go ahead and start here. The lists are very similar. Todd does have 4 copies of Mana Gorger Hydra and 4 copies of Gather Courage to go with it. Running that instead of some of the, I guess, Den Protector package that you'd expect from Brian.
Yeah, Brian's a little bit bigger and a little bit slower. Todd can definitely get some more explosive openings. Probably the better Dromoka's Command deck of the 2 in the matchup.
And there will be pressure on Brian to be able to answer a card like Mana Gorger Hydra. He does have 4 Obzon Charm and 2 Ultimate Prices removal for it. Either way, it'll be Todd with the first creature on turn 2. It's a copy of Fleecemane Lion. And no play from Brian, so Todd getting the tempo advantage, at least on creatures, to start the game.
Yeah, Brian's removal package here, 4 copies of Obzon Charm, 4 copies of Dromoka's Command, 2 copies of Ultimate Price. So the only possibility for this turn is Ultimate Price can't target the Fleecemane Lion with that, and if Todd can follow up with another gold creature, could set Brian really far behind.
Yeah, Ultimate Price can be a risky card against these Obzon aggressive decks. In Todd's deck, Ultimate Price can tag the 4 Mana Gorger Hydras and the 1 copy of Tassiger the Golden Fang, along with 2 Warden of the First Trees, but that's actually it. And from Todd, we see his turn 3 play of a Temple, and now another 2-drop. This is going to be a Hangerback Walker set to 1.
And Brian does not have plays he can make in this spot. Like I said, removal package, 4 copies of Dromoka's Command. He has no creatures in play, so that's off the table. 2 copies of Ultimate Price. Nothing Todd has in play can be targeted by Ultimate Price.
And now what Brian can do is, because his creatures are a little larger, there's a chance he can stabilize the board behind Anafenza the Foremost, I would think, and then maybe Siege Rhino down the road.
Yes, his big stuff can help stabilize the game, and if he can chain together some removal spells, then Den Protector becomes another path for stabilizing, but he is behind. I mean, Todd's off to a very aggressive start here. Brian's going to go through the first 2 turns of the game not doing anything, and Todd has a significant board presence.
All right, 3rd land from Brian, and still no play. Smells like a removal spell in this situation. It seems unlikely that Brian would keep something on a 7 on the draw with no plays through 3 mana.
Yeah, if it's Obzon Charm, that makes sense. If it's Heroes, there's no Heroes Downfall on the list. So Obzon Charm here is fine. I was going to say if it was Heroes Downfall, risky to pass because of Valorous Stance, but no copies of Downfall on Brian's list.
Here's the attack, and it is Obzon Charm from Braun. Duin. He has to take 1 damage to do so. So he'll exile the Fleecemane Lion, takes a damage off the cast, takes a damage off the Hangerback Walker, and he is down to 14. So we go to Todd, who's going to replace that threat. It's going to be Anafenza the Foremost now. So still 2 creatures to 0 for Todd. Though you have to think that Siege Rhino could be looming on Brian's side. It looks like it was his draw for the turn.
Yeah, though Todd's leftover is very good against Siege Rhino. You see Gather Courage, which could be good if Anafenza gets involved in combat, and a Valorous Stance as well, which answers the Rhino very cleanly.
And there's a Rhino, so the life total's nearly even out. Todd, no safe attacks on the board, but you're right, something like Valorous Stance, Dromoka's Command, Gather Courage, all ways to swing through this Rhino. And I guess from Todd's situation, it looks like he has at least a Gather Courage and Stance. He gets to pick how he wants to deal with the Rhino. Do you have a sense as to which one is more valuable here?
Because Brian's removal suite is not very good, Brian's removal suite is not very good at answering the board currently. I think that I would rather just use the Valorous Stance here as a method of trading. I guess the Gather Courage is the more narrow of the 2. Valorous Stance is going to be kind of good whenever. So if Brian makes a block here, I would expect Gather Courage. And if Brian does not offer up a block, then I think we'll see Valorous Stance after combat.
So see, what Todd did here is pre-combat, he tapped Hangerback Walker to give it a 1/1 counter. That allowed Anafenza to put an additional counter on the Hangerback, making it a 3/3. Todd attacked. Brian opted not to block. A lot of ways he could get blown out there. Obzon Charm and Gather Courage.
Yep. So Todd passing the turn here is saying maybe he'll present something better, and maybe I can blow him out if he goes for Dromoka's Command. There is some danger in doing that because Brian might have more instances in his hand to play back, but Todd's going to stop him before attacks here because of Wingmate Rock.
Right. There's the play. So Brian tried to go to attack. Todd will not have any of that. Valorous Stance is it. And for Brian, it is another copy of Siege Rhino. And this is really the strength of Siege Rhino. Despite the fact that Todd has been ahead 1 to 2 creatures all game, life totals are equal. Actually, 1 point in Brian's favor. We go back to Todd. We do know he still has the Gather Courage to push through.
And now he can make it and now he can just attack with both, put a counter on the Hangerback Walker, and then Brian's kind of forced to block in this spot, and Gather Courage can be excellent.
Now that Siege Rhino there is going to be exiled because of Anafenza's passive ability. See them go ahead and move him over to the exile zone.
Todd can also play the Sorin in his hand, plus, and at that point he's offering up a trade with Brian, essentially, as he'll have 2 different 5/4s.
So here's an attack, a pair of 4/4 swinging to the Siege Rhino. No bluffs about it here. Todd just being able to play his combat tricks at face value. And at some point, even though Brian knows he's not going to win this exchange, Brian's going to be priced into making a block.
Exactly. Are you going to fall to 6 here against an opponent with Gather Courage in hand? Pretty tough spot.
And there's the Gather Courage. So Anafenza takes down Rhino. Hangerback hits in for 4. Brian drops to 10. And Todd keeps the pressure going. Here's a post-combat Tassiger the Golden Fang. And some confidence here on Todd's part that Brian doesn't play any copies of Elspeth. It seems like if he didn't know Brian's list, this might have been an aggressive play.
Well, for one, I think it's likely they know each other's lists. They play a lot together, and Brian's been pretty public about the list that he plays. Second is, even if Brian goes Elspeth and minus, well, now you have 4 tokens. You finish off Elspeth, you still have a board. Brian has no copies of BioBlight in his list. And Todd's got a Sorin in hand to plus an attack with the Hangerback Walker tokens.
Oh, yeah, that Sorin would be great follow-up for Hangerback Walker. As it is for Brian, he's going to go ahead and play Fleecemane Lion. But down 3 creatures to 1. Now down on the life total race. Sorin looms. Things are looking grim for Brian here.
Yeah, Todd accidentally revealed the Sorin, but I think he was likely to cast it anyway.
And here it is, Sorin Solemn Visitor. That will be cast. A plus will give his creatures 1/0 and lifelink until next turn. That means all 3 creatures have 5 power, so as 3 swing in, if Brian doesn't have a removal spell, he's going to take 10. That's conveniently his life total, so he's going to need something to stay alive.
And even if he has a removal spell, the Fleecemane Lion's just chump blocking. It's not making any progress on the board. Yeah, and rather than even show that, Brian's going to go ahead and pack it in. So game 1 goes over to Todd Anderson. And you just saw very different levels of mana efficiency going on in that game. Todd, basically from turn 2 and beyond, was using all of his mana, whereas Brian passed through turn 1, turn 2, and then was trying to play catch up and could never quite get back into it, even with multiple Siege Rhinos.
So Todd up a game, going to sideboards, both players actually, it looks like we could have a significant amount of sideboarding they can do here, whereas they can become bigger and heavier hitting decks. Let's start with Brian as he's down a game. What's his transformation?
2 Ultimate Price, a Glare of Heresy, 2 Self-Inflicted Wound, 2 Tragic Arrogance, 4 Thoughtseize, 2 Elspeth, 2 Ajani Mentor Heroes. The transformation that I think that we're going to see here from Brian are the Planeswalkers, Elspeth and Ajani, Tragic Arrogance, Self-Inflicted Wound, and Glare of Heresy. Just become a bigger and better control deck.
So 2 sweepers, 3 kill spells, 5 Planeswalkers. It's a pretty big change. What does he have to get away from to make that kind of play?
Some of his removal spells, I think he can get rid of the 2 copies of Ultimate Price. They don't have a lot of targets in Todd's deck, even with the Hydra in the equation. I think on the play, Dramoka's Command is a little bit more attractive, but not necessarily good for Brian in the matchup because Todd's a little bit more efficient at playing to the board. So he can get away from some of his inefficient removal, just bring in more reliable stuff.
All right, so Brian has that package now. Todd also has some transformational sideboard of his own. We're going to look at this. The sideboard he has Ultimate Price, Glare of Heresy, his own Elspeths, his own Ajanis, and Tragic Arrogances. It seems like he may be on the same kind of plan post board.
Yeah, just become a little bit bigger and a little bit better at playing a longer game. The Tragic Arrogance, the Planeswalkers, the Temple of Silence has additional land here. I even think that God's Willing is fine for this matchup, even though, it's not quite part of a playing bigger and more powerful strategy. Brian's removal, a lot of it's, 3 mana, it's cumbersome, and you can get some really good exchanges with God's Willing. The Glare of Heresy seem very good here, fighting Planeswalkers, Siege Rhinos, and so forth.
Now, one question. You said that they might know each other's deck lists. So if that's the case, do we actually still think, can Brian get away from all these cards like Ultimate Price? Manor-Gorger Hydra is a 4 of in Todd's deck. And Brian, if he boards out Ultimate Price, doesn't have very many clean answers to it.
Well, you still have Self-Inflicted Wound, which is not a lot to work, but a reasonable chance. Your copies of Elspeth, your copies of Tragic Arrogance, and your 4 copies of Abzan Charm. There are going to be, if you cut all of your copies of Ultimate Price, there are going to be some games where the Hydra just runs away with it. You don't have enough removal spells. I think that's less likely. That's going to happen less often than it will happen. And I don't think he wants to be stuck with a bunch of Ultimate Prices in his deck that really struggle to find targets against Todd's list.
All right, so both players going toward a Planeswalker-heavy plan post board. It looks like it will be 2 Elspeths per side. 2 Johnny on Brian's side, 1 on Todd's. We'll see as they get into this slugfest of sweepers and planeswalkers who ends up on top. While they get ready for game 2, we're going to take a second, though, to talk about Star City Game Night. This has been going on for just about a year now. It takes place at your local stores around the country. The store runs an SCG Game Night for one of their weekly tournaments. What that means is if you have a chance to play in it, you will receive a different promotional pin and or token each week given away at prizes at these tournaments. As you see, for August this month, which we are just wrapping up, we gave away the monkey pin, which you see on our coats and on this screen and tokens. Next month is going to be the Kraken. This is in September. Now, if you want to sign up, you can't get the Kraken one, but we do have sign up starting in time for the October promo, which is going to be this Hippo token.
And again, you can go over to StarCityGames.com/game night for more information. Find the game night nearest you, or contact your Star City Games organized play representative if you want to get signed up for game night.
It's back to the match here. Brian gets to be on the play. Now, the pacing of that game, I mean, I know Todd's on a Hydra deck, so it's different. You know, he has some Gather Courages. It still feels a lot like an Obzon aggro mirror. And in that situation, the fact that Todd had 2 creatures to 0 just by virtue of having more creatures put him in a spot where Brian was always behind. You know, basically Todd was the creature. That game, Todd had the creatures and Brian had the removal, and it felt like the creatures were just constantly outclassing the removal. I mean, Brian had 2 Siege Rhinos and barely made a dent. In this situation, you know, is Fleecemane Lion just the most important card? Does this really change after board?
Well, you know, in that first game, Todd was on the play and went 2-drop, 2-drop, and Anafenza. Brian had no play on 1, no play on 2, and then turn 3, he was just answering the Fleecemane Lion that had already attacked. I think that Brian does play a better control game than Todd does, but for Brian to be able to execute that game plan, he needs to get out of the first couple turns without too much damage being done. Wasn't able to do that in the first game, but post-board, he gets more removal spells. And his top end, you know, we had a couple Siege Rhinos. Those were fine, but they didn't really impact the board. They weren't big enough to fight, and they were easy to kill. Brian gets some haymakers like Elspeth, which can win the game on their own, which something like Siege Rhino can't really do.
And that's the interesting part. When you look at their deck lists, one of the things they don't have in common is that Todd isn't playing any copies of Siege Rhino. So Brian had a kill spell, had 2 Rhinos. Normally you'd think as an Obzon player, if I just make consecutive Rhinos, I should be able to sit back and maybe block with them, maybe trade them, but that just never happened.
Right, one got swallowed up by a Valorous Dance, and he had to block, and a pump spell took care of the other one.
All right, so it's going to be Todd out of the gates first with a creature this time. It's once again a turn 2 Fleecemane Lion. This time, however, Todd is on the draw, and Brian matches creature with Anafenza the Foremost. Going back to Todd. He has been able to attack pretty freely those previous games. Here's an attack.
This is
It's a huge... It's interesting.
Well, so there's a couple of things that can happen here. Obzon Charm can happen, and BBD doesn't mind about that because the Obzon Charm could have just as easily removed the Anafenza.
Right, does he care that it would make the Lion a 5/5?
Maybe, maybe not. The other thing is Gather Courage, which is a really bad situation, but what are the odds that Gather Courage is still in Todd's deck post-board when Brian's bringing all these removal spells? I don't know. In any case, Brian's going to play it safe and just run no blocks.
He takes 3, Todd plays an Anafenza post-combat. I guess if Todd really wanted to run the Gather Courage bluff, he could have just played Anafenza and then attacked. That would have been a clear statement of the card.
Right, but this way Todd got to represent multiple cards.
All right, well, 4th land is from Brian. He'll attack with Anafenza, offer some trades. And the theme here really seems to be no one is safe to block in this matchup.
Now, certainly one person has mana up and the other person's tapped out. The person tapped out can't block, or it's very risky to block.
Yeah. Well, Anafenza will come in. That puts Todd Anderson down to 15. He took 1 damage to cast Anafenza off that Llanowar Wastes. And now we'll see Brian's follow-up. Was expecting maybe something like a Rhino, but Brian will just leave up mana right now. No blockers either, which certainly suggests he has a kill spell.
Yeah, one of his 3 mana removal spells, most likely.
And it's going to be Obzon Charm on Anafenza.
Oh, and I think Todd has his God's Willing.
Oof, that'd be great. He has Dromoka's Command. He's going to Dromoka's Command to make his Anafenza fight away Brian's Anafenza.
Oh, what a turn.
And then the God's Willing as well. This is just the consequence of, if you look at spells cast, Todd is up 4-2, and that seems to tell the story.
Yeah, and BBD tried to trap Todd a little bit there, but Todd was able to play a lot more efficiently at instant speed than Brian was.
And how punishing is this? An attack for 9 from Todd.
And the board's clean. one of the best cards that Brian has in the matchup is Wingmate Rock, and Todd's done such an excellent job of keeping the board clean.
Yeah, Brian plays an Anafenza, Todd exiles it, and that should be the match. So 2-0, Todd convincingly curves out Brian Braun Duin twice. We talked a lot about planeswalkers and removal spells in the sideboard, but that just looked like a repeat of game 1 as Todd wins as early as turn 5, I believe.
And even though Todd was probably sideboarding into a bigger deck, I don't know if he went all the way to Tragic Arrogance. You know, that's going really, really big for the matchup. God's Willing is so efficient against the removal that is in BBD's deck that even though it's not necessarily where Todd wants to be, he wants to have more attrition cards and more raw power. God's Willing just still has moments of being so good because BBD is packing so much 3-mana removal, and you saw that exchange. The God's Willing and the Dramoka's Command was way too much to overcome.
Yeah, the strength of the removal, when you look at Obs on decks in general, is their universalness. Hero's Downfall, Obs on Charm, Murderous Cut, these things just kill anything, but they're not mana efficient. They're not Magma Sprays. So when you have something like God's Willing, you're trading 1 mana for 3 of your opponents. It can be a real blowout.
Yeah, I mean, you just saw Todd was just more efficient with his mana in both games, and BBD died with spells in his hand in both games. And, you know, in a matchup like that where a lot of stuff is just colliding, it's going to be a question of who's more mana efficient and then who has more powerful stuff. And some games can be determined by mana efficiency, and then some games can be determined by who has more powerful stuff. BBD definitely has more powerful stuff in the deck, no question about it. He's got more planeswalkers and more removal and all that stuff, but Todd was way more mana efficient, and BBD just never got off the ground.
Yeah, it felt like Brian was being forced into the Obs on control role there, and this is, you know, that game played out as the way, as a lot of the games, I guess, when Obs on aggro beats control can play out, where they get a couple cards down. They can play creatures as quickly as the control deck can play kill spells, and in Todd's case, even God's Willing.
Yep, and I question the incentive for BBD to wait with that Obs on Charm until Todd's turn, because if you're going to do it once he moves into combat,
right,
you are just opening yourself up to exchanges like that. BBD was a little tricksy with his instance there, and I wonder if it bit him a little bit there.
Yeah, well, we'll get another match shortly here. So Obs on Hydra from Todd. We didn't actually see any Mana Gorger Hydras there. It really looked a lot like an Obs on aggro mirror. But what are our thoughts in general on this? He's not the only player playing Mana Gorger Hydras this weekend. Aaron Barrich actually on the card as well as a 4 of. We talked about it a bit with Cedric yesterday, how it might be a meta call against the card Hangerback Walker because it can't be chumped. And that certainly seems strong. But outside of that, where does the card really fit into the metagame?
Well, it's not nearly as powerful as Dramoka's Command, but in matchups where a lot of the same creatures are in play, you get into a lot of the same spots where, you know, we have Siege Rhinos. I attack, you're going to kind of block as a reflex, and then Gather Courage can be really, really, really good in those kind of exchanges. Also, if you happen to play against red decks,